He was born into a quiet world where sound never arrived the way it did for others, and from his earliest days his family understood that he experienced life through touch sight and feeling rather than hearing. His parents noticed early that he responded strongly to vibrations and movement when someone closed a door. He felt it through the floor when a truck passed outside. He placed his hands on the window and smiled because he sensed rhythm even if he could not hear it. As he grew older, this sensitivity became more focused, and one day while visiting a community center, he noticed a large piano in the corner when another child played it. He walked closer and placed his hand on the wooden body of the instrument. His eyes widened not because of sound, but because of the vibration moving through the wood and into his fingers. He stood there completely still, absorbing the feeling, as if the piano was speaking directly to him in a language he understood. From that moment, his connection to the piano became undeniable. He began asking to sit near pianos whenever possible, not to play at first, but to feel when others played. He watched hands closely, memorizing movement, posture, and timing. His parents supported him, cautiously unsure of where this interest would lead, but unwilling to stop something that brought him such calm focus and joy. Eventually, they found a local music school willing to let him explore the piano with supervision. The teachers were polite, but uncertain. Many believed music without hearing was impossible, and some quietly assumed the effort would fade. Yet the boy surprised them by remembering patterns accurately. His fingers learned where to go through repetition and touch rather than sound. He counted vibrations, timing his movements with precision that came from deep concentration. As months passed, his skill grew slowly but clearly, and while some instructors encouraged him, others remained doubtful, believing that without hearing tone and pitch, true mastery could never be reached. These opinions were often shared openly during meetings where professors discussed his progress, not cruelly but dismissively. And the boy, though unable to hear the words, felt the change in body language and expression. He sensed skepticism and distance, and it confused him because he felt music more clearly than. At home, he practiced daily, sometimes for hours. His parents watched with mixed emotions, pride, concern, and determination. He played not to prove anything, but because the piano felt like a place where the world made sense. His fingers moved confidently across the keys, guided by memory, vibration, and emotion. And when he finished playing, he often smiled peacefully, as if he had spoken a long sentence that needed no reply. When the school organized a small evaluation for advanced students, his name was included more as a formality than expectation. Several piano professors gathered to observe, and while they maintained professional courtesy, their expressions showed disbelief. Some whispered to each other while watching him take his seat. Their laughter was quiet but unmistakable, and though the boy could not hear it, he felt the shift in the room through posture, movement, and energy. He sat down calmly, adjusted his hands, and closed his eyes, not in nervousness, but in focus. He placed his palms lightly on the piano surface, first feeling the vibration beneath before moving to the keys. This was his way of grounding himself, connecting to the instrument before beginning. And as he prepared to play, no one in the room imagined that they were about to witness something that would challenge everything they believed about music ability and limitation. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them. When his fingers finally moved onto the keys, the room remained filled with doubt and restrained curiosity. The professors sat back in their chairs, arms crossed, faces neutral, expecting little more than a demonstration of effort. Rather than ability, they assumed the moment would confirm what they already believed, that music required hearing, and that anything beyond basic repetition would be impossible for someone like him. The first vibrations traveled through the piano body and into his hands, and immediately his posture changed. His shoulders relaxed, his breathing slowed, and his focus narrowed completely onto the movement beneath his fingers. He was not guessing or hesitating. His hands moved with intention, guided by muscle memory, rhythm, and the internal sense of timing he had built over years of practice. At first, the professors noticed only the technical correctness, the placement of fingers, the steady tempo, and the clean transitions. They exchanged glances, surprised that he was playing accurately, yet still expecting the performance to fall apart emotionally, because they believed feeling in music came from hearing, tone, and nuance. But as the piece continued, something unexpected happened. The room began to feel different. His playing carried weight and flow. His hands pressed the keys with varied pressure, creating depth that could be seen even if not heard fully through visual cues and vibration. Alone, his body swayed gently, not from habit, but from connection, as if he was moving with something internal. The professors leaned forward unconsciously, their skepticism slowly giving way to attention. The boy felt everything through vibration. Each chord resonated through the bench and into his legs. The sustain traveled through the wood and returned to his fingertips, guiding his next movement. He did not hear mistakes the way others did, but he sensed imbalance through feel and corrected instinctively. This awareness came from years of listening through touch and repetition rather than sound. As the performance unfolded, the quiet laughter from earlier felt distant, replaced by a silence thick with concentration. One professor adjusted his glasses, another uncrossed his arms, a third leaned closer to the piano, trying to understand how such control was possible. Without hearing, the boy remained unaware of their reactions, because his world at that moment consisted only of movement, memory, and emotion. His face showed calm determination, not struggle, not fear. He was not trying to impress, he was simply expressing something honest through the only channel that felt natural to him. The piano became an extension of his body, responding to intention rather than instruction. And that authenticity began to unsettle the assumptions held by those watching. The piece reached a more complex section requiring dynamic control and emotional phrasing. The professors expected hesitation or collapse. Yet instead they saw confidence. His hands moved with precision, his timing remained consistent, and his expression deepened. He felt the swell of vibration increase and decrease, adjusting his touch, accordingly shaping the performance through sensation alone. One professor glanced at another, shaking his head slowly, not in disapproval, but in disbelief. What they were witnessing challenged the foundation of their teaching. They had built careers on the belief that hearing was essential to musical mastery. And yet here was a boy proving that music could be understood differently, but just as deeply. As the final section approached, the boy slowed his movements, allowing the vibrations to fade naturally. He lifted his hands, gently resting them on the piano surface, once more grounding himself. As the last resonance disappeared, the room remained silent for a moment longer than expected. No one moved, no one spoke, because they were processing something they had not prepared for. When he stood up and turned to face them, he saw expressions he recognized, not skepticism, but confusion, respect, and something close to awe. He did not understand why, because for him, this was simply another time he had played the way he always did. His parents watched from the back of the room, holding their breath, sensing that something important had just shifted. The professors began speaking to one another. Their voices animated, their body language changed entirely. Hands gestured, faces softened, brows lifted. The laughter from earlier felt distant and misplaced, replaced by questions and reconsideration. One of them approached the boy, slowly kneeling to his level, and asked him how he learned to feel the music. The boy answered, simply saying he felt it everywhere, not just in his hands, but in his chest and legs and heart. That answer lingered in the room because it revealed something beyond technique. It revealed a relationship with music that went deeper than sound. And in that moment, the professors understood that they were not watching a limitation being overcome. They were witnessing a different form of mastery, one they had never been taught to recognize. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them. After the evaluation ended, the room slowly filled with movement again. Chairs shifted, papers were gathered, and quiet conversations began among the professors. Yet the tone was no longer dismissive. It carried uncertainty, curiosity, and reflection. The boy stood beside his parents, sensing the change through posture and expression. Even without hearing words, he could feel that something important had happened, and that the space now held him differently. One professor approached his parents first, speaking with careful respect, using gestures and expressions to communicate praise and interest. The parents listened attentively, their emotions balanced between relief and guarded hope, because they had experienced encouragement before that faded once reality returned. Yet this moment felt different. The questions being asked were not polite formalities, but sincere attempts to understand how the boy experienced music. The boy watched their faces closely, reading emotion the way he always had. He noticed softer eyes, slower movements, and thoughtful pauses. He did not feel pride in a loud sense, but he felt seen, which mattered far more to him than approval. His mother placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, grounding him, reminding him that no matter what followed, he was safe and valued. The professors invited him to play again, not as a test, but as a conversation. They asked if he would demonstrate how he practiced, how he sensed rhythm, and how he adjusted his playing without hearing sound. The boy agreed calmly, and returned to the piano, this time placing one hand on the wooden side, while the other rested on the keys, showing how vibration guided him before he even began to play. He demonstrated slowly pressing a single key, then another, allowing the vibration to travel through his body. He showed how he counted movement rather than sound, and how memory helped him predict what came next. The professors watched closely, some taking notes, others simply observing, their earlier certainty now replaced by learning. One professor who had laughed earlier stood quietly near the back, his arms no longer crossed, his face thoughtful. He had spent years teaching technique, listening intently to tone and pitch, and yet he now realized that he had overlooked an entire dimension of musical experience. The idea unsettled him, not because it threatened his authority, but because it revealed how limited his perspective had been. As the boy finished explaining, he smiled softly, not expecting praise, only understanding. The professors thanked him genuinely and asked if he would be willing to continue studying with adjusted methods designed around his strengths, rather than forcing him into traditional structures. This was the first time anyone had spoken to him not as an exception or problem, but as a musician with a unique approach. At home that evening, the boy sat quietly while his parents discussed the day. They spoke about opportunity, caution, and the need to protect his emotional balance. They knew that attention could become pressure, and that pressure could steal joy. They asked him how he felt, and he answered honestly, saying he felt calm and a little tired, but happy that people wanted to understand rather than judge. That night he practiced briefly, not to improve, but to release emotion. His fingers moved gently across the keys, and his body relaxed. He did not think about professors or future paths. He thought only about the feeling of vibration and flow. The way music made him feel connected to the world around him in a way nothing else could. In the days that followed, the school atmosphere changed. Teachers greeted him differently, classmates watched with curiosity, and staff members spoke with new respect. Yet he remained the same, focused, quiet, and grounded. His parents reminded him daily that his value did not increase or decrease with attention, and he listened because he trusted them completely. Part 3 of his journey unfolded not with applause, but with recognition that ability could take many forms, and that the world sometimes needed to be shown rather than told. He did not seek to challenge beliefs, but by being himself he had done exactly that, opening a door not only for his future, but for others who might one day be told they could not belong. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them. The weeks that followed brought steady change rather than sudden transformation, and the boy felt it in the way people interacted with him, and in the expectations that quietly formed around his presence at the music school. The professors who once doubted him now approached with curiosity, asking questions, and observing closely, not to judge, but to learn, and this shift felt heavier than laughter because it carried responsibility. New practice sessions were arranged specifically for him, not to isolate him, but to understand him better. These sessions focused on touch, movement, rhythm, and physical awareness rather than sound. And for the first time, the boy felt that his way of experiencing music was not being tolerated, but respected. He responded by practicing with even greater focus, aware that this was not about proving worth, but about honoring trust. One professor in particular began working closely with him, a man who had spent decades teaching traditional methods, and now found himself relearning music through the eyes and hands of a child. Their sessions were slow and thoughtful, often involving long moments of observation. Rather than instruction, the professor learned to communicate through gesture, expression, and patience, and the boy learned that teaching could be a shared journey rather than a one-sided exchange. At home, his parents noticed subtle changes. He asked deeper questions about emotion, timing, and meaning. He wanted to understand why certain movements felt right, and others felt empty. His curiosity expanded beyond technique into philosophy and feeling, and his parents supported this growth by encouraging reflection rather than pressure. They reminded him often that progress did not require speed. Outside the school world, reactions varied. Some parents praised him openly, others expressed quiet doubt, questioning whether his achievements could truly last. The boy sensed these mixed reactions, even without hearing them, through body language and tone, yet he remained steady, because his sense of self was rooted in experience, not opinion. One afternoon, the school hosted an informal gathering, inviting students to share their progress. The boy was included not as a showcase, but as a participant. This distinction mattered to his parents, who wanted him seen as equal rather than exceptional. He agreed to play, understanding that this was another chance to communicate through music rather than explanation. As he played, the room fell into attentive stillness. Classmates watched not with competition, but curiosity and admiration. They saw how his body moved with intention, how his hands responded to the instrument, and how calm his expression remained throughout the performance. The professors observed quietly, noting how naturally he adapted to the space and energy of the room. Afterward, students approached him, asking questions not about his hearing, but about his focus, his memory, and how he stayed calm while playing. These conversations surprised him, because they revealed that people were now interested in learning from him rather than defining him by limitation. He answered honestly, sharing what he knew and admitting what he did not, and this honesty deepened respect on both sides. That evening, his mother asked how he felt about the attention. He considered carefully and explained that he liked when people listened, but not when they expected something from him. She understood immediately and promised to protect that boundary, reminding him that he could always step back if things felt too heavy. Part 4 of his journey became a lesson in balance, learning how to accept opportunity without losing peace, how to share talent without becoming defined by it, and how to move forward while staying grounded in the quiet world where his connection to music first began. And through it all, he remained steady, guided by touch, rhythm, and the deep understanding that music lived not only in sound, but in feeling, movement, and truth. As his presence at the school became more familiar, the expectations around him continued to grow quietly, and the boy began to sense a new kind of pressure, not from doubt, but from belief. People now expected him to succeed, to inspire, and to represent something larger than himself. And while this belief was kinder than laughter, it still carried weight that he needed to understand and manage. The professors discussed future opportunities, carefully considering competitions, showcases, and public performances. Some believed his story could open doors and change perspectives, while others worried that exposure might overwhelm him. His parents listened closely, grateful that caution was now part of the conversation. Rather than dismissal, they asked the most important question: how would this affect the boy as a person, not just as a musician? The boy himself was aware of these discussions through changes in routine and increased attention. He noticed longer meetings, more observations, and new faces watching his practice sessions. He did not feel fear, but he felt a pull inward, a need to protect the quiet space where his music lived. He shared this feeling with his mother, who listened attentively, and reassured him that his voice mattered most in deciding the path forward. Together, they agreed to take one step at a time, starting with a small public performance organized by the school in a familiar environment. The goal was not to impress an industry or challenge beliefs, but to share music honestly. The boy accepted this plan because it felt aligned with his values and allowed him to remain grounded. In preparation for the performance, he practiced differently, focusing not only on accuracy, but on connection. He paid attention to how the vibrations felt in different rooms, how his body responded to varying acoustics, and how his emotions shifted with tempo and touch. These observations helped him refine his expression and deepen his trust in his own process. The day of the performance arrived quietly, without spectacle. The audience included students, families, teachers, and a few guests from outside the school. The boy waited calmly, feeling the familiar nervous energy in his body. Yet it did not disturb him. It sharpened his awareness and grounded him in the present moment. When he sat at the piano, he followed his usual ritual, placing his hands on the instrument, first feeling its presence, and allowing his breathing to settle. He began to play with gentle confidence, letting the music unfold naturally. The room responded with stillness and attention, not because of his story, but because of the sincerity in his playing. As the piece progressed, the audience felt something genuine, though many could not articulate it. They sensed intention, emotion, and control woven together seamlessly. And when he finished, the response was warm and respectful. Applause rose, not in shock, but in appreciation, and the boy felt calm rather than overwhelmed. After the performance, several people approached his parents, expressing admiration and curiosity. Some spoke about opportunities, others simply thanked them for sharing the moment. The parents acknowledged these words politely, but remained focused on their son, checking in with him, ensuring he felt safe and supported above all else. That evening, the boy reflected quietly, understanding that his music now reached beyond himself, and that this reach came with responsibility. He realized that his journey was no longer just personal, it carried meaning for others who might feel unseen or underestimated. This realization did not frighten him, but it made him thoughtful, aware that every step forward should be chosen with care. Part 5 of his story marked the moment where belief replaced doubt completely, but also where wisdom became essential, learning how to carry encouragement without letting it turn into burden, how to accept visibility without losing authenticity, and how to continue growing while staying true to the quiet, powerful connection that had always guided him through a world defined not by sound, but by feeling and truth. As the boy moved deeper into this new phase of his journey, his daily life began to change in subtle but important ways. His schedule became more structured, and his time more carefully planned, yet his inner world remained calm, because every decision continued to center on balance rather than ambition. He practiced regularly, but never to exhaustion, and he spent equal time resting, walking, and observing the world around him, because these moments fed his music just as much as time at the piano. The professors who guided him now treated him as a student with a distinct path. Rather than an exception, they adjusted teaching methods, focusing on physical feedback, visual cues, and emotional intention instead of sound alone. And through this collaboration, they too began to grow, discovering aspects of music they had rarely considered before. The boy sensed this mutual respect, and it strengthened his confidence, not as pride, but as trust in shared understanding. There were moments when frustration appeared, not from inability, but from complexity. As pieces grew more demanding, the physical coordination required deeper focus and endurance. On those days, his mentor reminded him that struggle did not mean failure but growth, and that even silence and rest were part of learning. The boy accepted this wisdom and learned to pause without guilt, allowing patience to guide him forward. Outside the school environment, more people became aware of his presence. Invitations arrived from small cultural groups and educational events, seeking not spectacle but perspective. His parents evaluated each request, carefully discussing it with him openly, and together they chose only those that felt safe, respectful, and meaningful. This process taught him that boundaries were not barriers, but protections that allowed authenticity to survive attention. At one event, he met another young person with a different disability who expressed fear of never being taken seriously. The boy listened closely, recognizing familiar emotions through expression and movement rather than sound. He responded with honesty, explaining that doubt might always exist, but self-belief and consistency could slowly change how others listened. This interaction stayed with him, because it revealed that his journey now reached beyond music into encouragement and example. As months passed, his playing gained deeper emotional range, not because of technical leaps, but because of lived experience. His understanding of patience, misunderstanding, and resilience shaped how he touched the keys. His music carried quiet strength and gentle honesty, and those who listened often felt a sense of grounding without fully knowing why. At home, his parents noticed that he had become more reflective, asking thoughtful questions about purpose and future. He wondered how to continue sharing music without becoming defined only by his difference. His parents reassured him that identity could hold many truths at once, and that he was allowed to grow beyond any single label. This reassurance helped him breathe easier and remain centered. One evening while practicing alone, he paused and placed his hands flat on the piano, feeling the familiar vibration beneath his palms. He remembered the early days when touch was his only guide, and realized that despite growth, learning, and recognition, the foundation had never changed. Music still lived first in feeling and connection, and that realization brought him comfort and clarity. Part 6 of his journey became a time of inner strengthening, a period where confidence settled quietly into his bones, and where choice replaced reaction. He no longer moved in response to doubt or praise, but in alignment with his values. And through this alignment, his music continued to deepen, carrying not the need to impress but the desire to connect. And in that connection, he found a steady sense of direction, ready for whatever path lay ahead without needing certainty or approval. As the boy continued to grow, his journey entered a phase where reflection became as important as action. He was no longer simply responding to opportunities, but actively shaping how he wished to move forward. This awareness brought calm maturity rather than urgency, and those around him noticed the quiet confidence that settled into his presence. He began spending more time alone with the piano, not to practice difficult passages, but to explore feeling and intention. He experimented with touch, pressure, and timing, allowing emotion to guide movement. Instead of structure, these sessions were unplanned and unrecorded, and they reminded him why he had fallen in love with the instrument long before others noticed his ability. People now approached him with respect rather than curiosity, and conversations shifted from how he played to why he played. He explained through gesture, writing, and expression that music helped him understand himself and the world, and that it gave shape to emotions that otherwise had no place to go. These explanations resonated deeply with listeners because they carried sincerity rather than performance. His parents observed that he had become more independent in decision-making. He considered invitations, carefully weighing emotional cost and personal growth over visibility. He declined some opportunities without guilt and accepted others with thoughtful preparation. This balance protected his sense of self and prevented burnout at a time when many young talents lost direction. At school and in community spaces, he was invited to speak with other students, not as a symbol, but as a peer who had navigated difficulty with patience. He shared openly about misunderstanding, frustration, and persistence, emphasizing that progress was often quiet and slow. These conversations built genuine connection and helped others feel less alone in their own struggles. One moment stood out when a young student who had been overlooked approached him after a small gathering, expressing doubt about their own abilities. The boy listened attentively and responded with encouragement rooted in experience rather than advice. He explained that being underestimated did not mean being incapable, and that belief often followed consistency rather than talent alone. The student left with renewed hope, and the boy realized that his impact extended far beyond the piano. As this phase unfolded, he became more comfortable with silence, both literal and emotional. He understood that not every moment required explanation or validation. This comfort allowed him to move through spaces with grace and stability, and it reflected in his music, which grew more spacious and intentional, leaving room for listeners to breathe and feel. Part 7 of his story became a chapter of quiet leadership, where influence emerged naturally through presence, integrity, and example. He no longer needed to challenge assumptions because his existence already did. And with each step he remained grounded in the same truth that had guided him from the beginning, that music lived not in sound alone, but in connection, understanding, and the courage to remain authentic in a world that often rushed to define before listening. As his journey reached a place of quiet completeness, the boy, now a young man, stood with a deep sense of peace. Rather than triumph, he did not feel that he had arrived at an ending, because music had taught him that growth did not stop, it only changed shape. What had changed most was not how others saw him, but how he understood himself and his place in the world. He no longer carried the memory of laughter as a wound. Instead, it lived as a lesson that guided his choices. When entering new spaces, he remembered how easily people judged what they did not understand, and how patience and honesty could soften even the strongest doubts. This understanding made him gentle with others, because he knew that disbelief often came from fear rather than cruelty. His relationship with the piano remained intimate and grounded. He still began each session by placing his hands on the instrument, feeling its presence, and allowing his breath to settle. This ritual connected him to the boy he once was, and reminded him that everything he had built came from that simple connection through touch, rhythm, and feeling. He chose a life that balanced learning, sharing, and quiet living. He continued his education, thoughtfully seeking teachers and environments that respected his way of experiencing music rather than trying to reshape it. He collaborated with others not to prove difference, but to explore possibility. And through these collaborations, he found joy in shared creation rather than individual recognition. People who heard him play often spoke of calm and clarity. They felt grounded and understood, even if they could not explain why. He accepted these responses with gratitude, knowing that music had done what words could not, and that his role was not to explain, but to remain honest in expression. His parents watched him with pride, not because of recognition or success, but because he had grown into a person guided by integrity, kindness, and self-awareness. They knew the road had not been easy, yet they also knew that the challenges had shaped him gently rather than hardened him, and this knowledge brought them deep comfort. Sometimes he returned to school's community centers and small halls not as a performer, but as a listener. He met young people who felt unseen or misunderstood, and he shared time rather than advice. He showed them through presence that difference did not need permission to exist, and that value often revealed itself slowly through consistency and care. He understood now that his story was never about proving that a deaf person could play the piano. It was about showing that music lived beyond sound, and that human potential could not be measured by narrow definitions. This understanding freed him from labels, and allowed him to move forward without needing to represent anything other than himself. When he played alone late in the evening, the world felt still and complete. He felt vibration through his hands and body, and he smiled softly, knowing that this connection had carried him through doubt, growth, and understanding, and that it would continue to guide him wherever life led. Part 8 of his journey did not close with applause, awards, or headlines. It closed with continuity, a life lived in alignment with truth and purpose, where music remained a companion rather than a destination, and where the boy who was once laughed at had grown into a man who no longer needed the world to believe, because he had always believed in the language that lived beneath sound and spoke through feeling, patience, and unwavering authenticity.